Charlotte Dujardin, Olympic champion, equestrian icon, a rider who redefined modern dressage. But what happens when a golden reputation collides with controversy? This podcast is all about diving deeper into the equestrian world, beyond just the headlines. I'm Caroline Lindsay, horsesaddlerider.com. Welcome to the Horse Saddle Rider podcast, the place where I scrutinise the big issues shaping the horse world today. This episode has details of Charlotte riding Valegro and her training relationship with Carl Hester leading up to the Olympics.
Hello and welcome back. And thank you to those who have been contributing to the comments and to those who are just generally following this story. I know that you're making a difference. So in the last session, I finished with her comment that any competition I enter, I want to win. So obviously I wanted to beat Carl, but I never thought I actually would. And then she starts beating Carl. And she said beating Carl and Utopia, into second place was surreal. I felt so chuffed and proud of myself, but it was quite strange in the prize giving. All I could think was, oh my God, Carl is behind me. I didn't want to look over at him because obviously I felt a bit sheepish. Although, of course, in the car on the way home with my sister, I was whooping and cheering my head off. A horse can be brilliant in the school at home, but if it doesn't want to perform, you can't make it. So why would you give a horse a whipping, as she did in the abuse video? Having a horse that wants to work with you is crucial, which is why the partnership between horse and rider is so important. Yeah, but what happened in the abuse video? As it became obvious just how good Blueberry was, people started to wonder why I was riding him when Carl had his pick of the horses. I knew people were already intrigued by me and wanted to know why Carl had taken me on. So I did feel like I had something to prove. And again, yes, this is all feeding into her strong urge to win competitions. Because Blueberry had so much energy, the routine I'd developed was to ride him twice at shows. I'd get him out in the morning, give him a little trot and canter for 20 minutes, put him away, then get him out again to do my 40-minute warm-up. This time we'd been drawn so early that the arenas weren't open when I wanted to be getting on him for the first time. So when I went to warm him up, he was electric. So obviously, having tried to get the competitive edge, this time it wasn't going to work. And she was at the national championships. Valegro was so fresh and I wanted to win our last test so badly that when I went to do the serpentine, he absolutely exploded in one of the changes. It was just enough to drop to second. I was so disappointed and made up my mind then that whatever happened, I wasn't going to put myself under such pressure to win that I actually stopped loving being out there. But was I ever going to get that chance with Blueberry again? I felt gutted that my career with him might be about to end, and to end this way. Okay, coming second wasn't a disaster, but we'd won pretty much every time out until now. So she's been concerned that she may lose the ride on Valegro to Carl, and coming second didn't sit well with her. There was never a moment when I realised Carl wasn't actually going to take Blueberry back. Nothing was said, and if we hadn't been doing so well, I don't think Carl would have hesitated to take the ride. But he himself was notching up the wins with Uti, and having been given so many opportunities by his mentor, I knew Carl felt he wanted to give someone else a turn. What I didn't know then was the other reason he finally decided to let me and Blueberry carry on. The idea he'd had that he and I on Uti and Blueberry might make the basis of a British team. Okay, so Carl was thinking ahead here strategically, that the more support and encouragement and opportunities he gave to Charlotte, the more likely he was to build a team. Of course, in all our wildest dreams, neither of us could have foreseen how that was going to work out. Uncertainty isn't something I'm good at. Carl had evented early in his career and had previously helped Mark Todd with his dressage. But when Mark needed some help in late 2009, Carl was busy and put Mark in touch with me. And she would say things like, "Mark, is that horse on the bit? Is that what it's meant to look like?" "What's wrong with it?" says Mark. "Well, you've got to shorten up your reins by about 10 inches for a start." Back in the day, dressage didn't much affect the final result of a 3-day event, but now you can't get away with a horse that's behind your leg and stiff as a plank of wood. I'd always imagined event horses to be sharp, supple and forward-thinking because of all the galloping they have to do, but it wasn't until I began riding Marks that I realised I was going to have my work cut out. But being asked to help him was a huge honour, especially because I was still quite new to dressage myself. So here she is, new to dressage, coaching Mark Todd, basically telling him to shorten the reins by 10 inches as a coaching technique. And probably by now must feel something of a pro. Going from Blueberry, who was perfect, to Archie was quite a shock. Archie was another of Carl's horses. He was a really good mover and had a lovely canter, but when Carl first bought him, he'd had to sign a disclaimer because Archie had already put so many people on the floor. Carl decided it was going to be my job to teach Archie how to trot. So what was it about her that Carl was assured that she could improve this horse? Carl was starting to admit that trot was one of the very few things I was better at than he was. Archie, however, was what you might call quite opinionated. And a lot of those early months were spent being jumped out of the arena or just galloped off with. I loved him, but most of what I was trying to do with him, making him bend and be supple, lateral work, he really did not like. Why? Is this about pain again that she's just not picking up? "I think you need a double bridle," a Spanish team trainer said. "Yes," I said, with feeling, "I think I do." Having some breaks helped, although Archie would still bolt every time I asked for a flying change. So this is a horse who I consider to be in pain. I know Carl was nervous for us when we went into the final, but I touched wood and Archie turned out to be as good as gold. We came out with 79%, which was more than enough for first place. So now she's on the international scene. Like Valegro, Supernova was owned by Carl and Rowley. Unlike Blueberry, Neville was probably one of the ugliest horses we'd ever had on the yard. He was a good 16 hands and had an incredibly powerful hind end, but a really skinny neck and a head that was never going to win any prizes for beauty. He was a very rude horse to handle too, and had his own opinion on life. He wouldn't want to go on the lorry, wouldn't want to leave the other horses, and made himself quite difficult for the girls to handle. But he was showing signs of being super talented at Piaffe and Passage. And although we only had a handful of outings, we won several times at Advanced Medium. So what is she doing here? How is she training these horses? Why is she so concerned about their looks? Because to me, it shows that she has a disdain for almost every horse she meets. So why was this horse rude? Why was he opinionated on life? I say pain. So now she's making a step up to Grand Prix. Questions had been asked before about why I and not Carl was riding Valegro. It had happened ahead of the advanced medium at the 2009 Nationals, which had added to the pressure that day. I'd been able to put it to the back of my mind before, but when it happened again at the start of 2011, the negative comments went deeper. It really dented my confidence and made me doubt myself. Maybe I wasn't good enough to be riding Carl's horse. Then I realised I basically had two choices. I could either let the negativity get to me and fall to pieces, or I could turn it around. Again, recall that she's very competitive. Nothing will hold her back. And winning is most important for her. Right, I thought, you're not going to defeat me. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to show you what I can do. At home, I'd made mistake after mistake after mistake. Well, exactly what is a mistake for Charlotte? Because she said the whipping in the abuse video was a mistake. So I'm not really clear what she terms a mistake. I'd get them, then I'd lose them. Then I'd get them, then I'd lose them. I got to the point of thinking I was never going to get it right. So this is either her riding or the horse's unwillingness to perform, i.e. potentially in pain. After I'd ridden, I sat on the sidelines trying to watch, absorbing all the different techniques and learning as much as I could about all the different things the riders were doing. So she learns by observing. Although riding a Grand Prix on Des felt a bit strange after Blueberry, Des wasn't able to cover the ground in the same way, but because I wasn't having to work all the time just to contain his power, the same job felt much easier. So, contain his power is an interesting term here. We know, or she says, that Blueberry is a very tense, explosive horse. And here she states how she deals with it is to contain his power. Well, how? Is it with the hands? Is it with the reins that are up to 10 inches shorter? So on this occasion, Carl beat her on Utopia in the Grand Prix. And then Blueberry and I won the special. I know Carl felt he deserved to win that too. There was only 0.08%, less than 1% between them, although it would have been more if I hadn't made an error, she considers. I came out feeling frustrated I'd let Blueberry down, but I was starting to find beating Carl a bit addictive. Yeah, is this continual urge to win an addiction? It sounds like she's describing it that way. The first time it happened had seemed like a fluke, and I'd actually felt a bit embarrassed for myself. But the more it happened, the more I was starting to love it. I'd always wanted to win, but one of the things Carl helped teach me was how to ride a test competitively in terms of learning the test, remembering where to go, preparing and organising, and how you use your corners to set yourself up, how you use your short sides and half halts, and how important it is to ride accurately. So the competitive edge. Buying and selling horses is just a fact of the sport. I'd made up my mind about selling Des if I ever got him sound again. I knew Des and I had got as far as we could together. Part of being a good rider is taking into consideration a horse's limits. And although Des had gone far beyond anyone's expectations, he just didn't have the same ability as Blueberry had. I'd realised I was in danger of pushing Des the way I did Blueberry. Okay, so she realises that one aspect of her training technique is risky for some reason. and that because he was so genuine, he might injure himself trying for me. Okay, so she's aware that techniques can cause injury. She had to back off. She knew that the new owner would love Des as much as she did. At the 2011 Europeans, I achieved the first of my goals. To have gone from stable girl to a member of the British team was one thing, but being on a team with Carl Hester was the icing on the cake. All I'd ever wanted was to make him proud of me, and knowing that I had was one of the most amazing feelings. So this is about Carl. So again, she's seeking approval. It really means a lot to her. And this reflects back to her childhood, in my view, that she's seeking approval from a parent, a mother, for some reason. It's not clear, but it's a very strong trait in her. To have won a team gold medal in my first year at Grand Prix and beaten the Germans and Dutch, all with a horse who was only 9, was just unbelievable. The draw for the special on the Saturday meant that Carl and I were riding too close together for him to help warm me up. And I felt a little bit lost and insecure without him. This is very parental to me. As ever, the top-ranked riders then went through to the freestyle, but there I made a bit of a mess. For the first time, the music I was riding to had been put together especially for me, and it had only arrived the day before. I hadn't had time to practice, and I was so nervous that when the judges rang the bell, instead of putting my hand up to start the music, I saluted. Everybody was laughing at me, and I ended up going wrong and having to make it up. So Blueberry and I ended up 9th. What a blow. As Uti and Blueberry were starting to get more and more success, we had started working on them together. I would ride first and Carl would sit down and help teach me. Then I'd sit down and help him. It had become a pattern, and training both horses the way we did was obviously working. So they would take it in turns to observe, to coach and correct each other from the ground. So just getting a little insight there into what these training techniques were. As Carl had decided that I was the queen of trot, he'd always been the king of canter, I'd taken over Uti's trot work at home and some of his piaffe passage, partly to save Carl's back. So Carl is struggling here. Uti is a small horse but so bouncy. I loved riding him because he was a ball of fun, but his trot bashed you right up the rear end. Okay. Perhaps a change of saddle might be indicated there. He loves to joke that our relationship is give and take. He gives advice and I have to take it. But I am who I am, and when I'm training, I tell it how it is. It doesn't matter if you're Mark Todd, Carl Hester, or anybody else. Black is black and white is white with me. And although Carl is an amazing rider and my absolute hero, if he starts curling his horse up to the left or swinging his body in the changes, I tell him. After years of being called Eddie by him, I've got my revenge and come up with my own nickname for him, Grandad. Carl hated it, especially when I started using it in public. So now she's putting him down. A joke is one thing, but putting Carl down in public, her mentor, her colleague, is very unprofessional, apart from it's unnecessarily hurtful. It can be. But if he wasn't going to stop, neither was I. After I'd sold Fernandez, I was in the fortunate position of being able to buy a house of my own. Oh, so this horse had realised a value as much as the cost of a house in the Cotswolds. So a sizable sum. Carl is 5 minutes down the road and there's only an acre of land. Only. With their share of the money, my parents were also able to pay off their mortgage. So after everything Fernandez had given me, he'd now given us all stability and financial security as well. So much as there are many people who wouldn't sell their own horses, it's very tempting if you have little or no money and somebody comes along with a price that's high enough to provide you with security and your parents in the form of owning homes outright. It was a great way for all of us to end the year. One that for me had been nothing less than mind-blowing. It was only 9 months since I'd been scoring 73% at my first international Grand Prix. And now here we were hitting the 80s. So yeah, that is a huge jump. And with the London Olympics only 8 months in the future, the buzz about our medal chances had really begun. So, yeah, her rise to success was meteoric. I think Carl's input had a lot to do with that. So at this point, she'd been trained and mentored by Carl for some 7 years on a very close daily basis as she worked with him and lived nearby. And here she talks about groom Alan Davis, Carl's groom. He's definitely the key to my success because he never stresses. And even if things do go wrong, he just deals with it calmly so Carl and I can get on with our job. So yeah, there should be a shout out for the grooms because they do a lot to make success happen. So then she's flying off to Wellington in Florida for the World Dressage Masters. Having had a few days' rest to recover from the flight, Blueberry was raring to go. The atmosphere for the Grand Prix was electric and he was so excited I could barely hold him. So arms possibly burning again. By the time we'd completed the first movements, he was already pulling my arms out. There you go. And I almost had to stand up in my stirrups for the half passes. He was so strong. This is not dressage. It's not. Then she's being filmed for TV, and one of her training sessions with Carl is filmed. Carl made me ride down the centre line about 100 times. Why? A repetition is a form of punishment, if you hadn't heard that before. It's the way we always work together. I do something and he'll tell me to pat the horse, slap myself and do it again. So why does she have to do it repeatedly? Why isn't the problem spotted and the correction made? I think it's because coaches are not as familiar as they should be with riders' functional restrictions off the horse, because many of those can be fixed off the horse or addressed off the horse. It shouldn't be addressed on the horse, or they should certainly assess, evaluate for those restrictions, fix them, and then put the rider on the horse. So this is not just Carl, this is many coaches. We end up doing things again and again and again, but that's what dressage is all about, discipline and perfection. But it's not about repetition. It's about identifying a problem and working with it first off the horse. Because it's clear here that she's the one that has the problem, and that's why it's having to be repeated over and over again. Doesn't sound like it's the horse, or she's certainly not saying here that it's the horse. Much of the attention was on Matthias and Tortilas, who were looking stronger than they had done in Rotterdam. Now they'd had time to develop as a combination. It made you feel quite sorry for Matthias, because he couldn't ride anywhere without people taking pictures and filming him and criticising him on social media. So, yeah, this must be concerning for some riders that would rather train in private. In the build-up to big competitions, my preparation never varies. It begins the night or morning before, when I'll watch a DVD of an old test or training session with Carl on my iPad, so I can see where I'm weak and also get the feel in my body of what I need to be doing. But if you're feeling weak, you need to address that if it's postural. Sometimes it's only by seeing myself that I can completely understand what Carl has been telling me. Plus, hearing him screaming at me means that when I'm on my own, what I need to do comes almost automatically because I can still hear his voice in my head. Presumably, he's not screaming at her words of encouragement. Then the final hour or so before warming up, I'll spend with my groom in the lorry, and they'd have a little boogie together. So in the arena, it was actually a relief, peace and quiet, nobody screaming at her or stressing. I could just go and ride, and I didn't make a single mistake the whole way round. And talking about flying changes, blueberries had always been the patchiest part of my test because they were so big, and in warm-ups I often couldn't get them. But it was as though he knew how important this was. I don't even know how I did it. All I could think was, wow, Carl had been yelling at me for so long that I didn't move my legs fast enough, and I had to be quicker. But there are exercises for that you can do. Why is it that training horse riding in the main occurs on the horse? There is so much that riders can do off the horse in terms of working on their own posture. Whenever I'm competing, I visualize myself going down the center line as though I'm at home. Just because I'm not doesn't make any difference to what I'm doing. In fact, riding in the arena at a competition is always less scary for me than riding at home, because at home, it's Carl sitting in the judge's box. So yeah, Carl, she's describing here as quite formidable and scary. But some athletes find that style facilitating. But I knew from experience that if I got nervous, that's when things started to go wrong. And she'd just got a world record. We were both absolutely ecstatic, and of all places, it had happened in Germany. So now we're getting closer to the London Olympics. Carl had decided not to compete duty so that he could concentrate on helping me. He knew at the Olympics I'd be the one everyone was relying on to bring in the big score. So lots of pressure on her there. But she has a strong desire to win. So that was potentially going to give her the competitive edge here. There had been people along the way who told me I'd never be successful simply because I didn't have enough money. And I thought, I don't care, you're not going to stop me. I'm just going to keep trying. And now I'd done it. I was on an Olympic team through dedication and sheer hard work. And a lot of luck and being in the right place at the right time. Carl had decided with the selectors that I was going to be riding last on the second day of the Grand Prix. Normally, it's the most experienced riders who go last, but Carl had wanted to ride first, so he was free to help me prepare. Yeah, good thinking, Carl. Carl knew Blueberry was reliable and that if I did well, I could get the biggest score. And standing on the podium, and to have Carl standing next to me. Before the national anthem, I turned to hug him, the person who'd given up so much for me and believed in me enough to make my dreams come true. So yeah, finally, Carl is getting some recognition from Charlotte. And then when she'd scored her record-breaking 90.089%. The noise was so loud and so sudden, it caught me and Blueberry both by surprise, and he shot forward. Then I burst into tears and fell down onto his neck. He didn't know what we'd just done, And I couldn't tell him in words, but I could hug him and try and show him how grateful I was. So there, we've got Valegro getting some recognition from her too, because it is actually the horse that does most of this. The horse is the athlete. The rider merely facilitates. Every medal is special, but an individual medal always feels a bit more special. It's a sentimental thing because it's something that you've gone out and won entirely for yourself. And did I think I deserved it? Yes. So having an individual medal is direct reward and a payoff for this very strong urge and drive to win at any cost. The past few months had been the best, most incredible months of my entire life, but there was another side to it all that people didn't see. Just before the Olympics, the news had broken that Blueberry was up for sale. I'd always known that was Carl's plan, so it didn't come as a shock. But I'd cried after every test I'd ridden at the Olympics thinking, this is my last Grand Prix. And this is my last freestyle. And part of the reason I'd been so emotional after that second gold was knowing I was going to lose him. And that was something I didn't know if I could cope with. Well, is this about losing her vehicle to go on and win more prizes? You tell me in the comments. Because she managed to part with Des, and at this point, she didn't even own Valegro. So I'm going to leave it there for now, and I'll be back soon with another reading. We are about 2/3 of the way there. I probably have another session after this one, but we'll see. I'll be back soon.
If you found this episode thought-provoking, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, leave a review. It really helps more equestrians and horse lovers find the podcast. You can also join the conversation on the Horse Saddle Rider YouTube channel. And finally, I'll be giving you more insights into the equestrian world. So be sure to come back and join me so that together we can campaign for better conditions for our sport horses.